I do not believe I can do justice to the impact he had on policy in this region, and I do not believe I can encapsulate his, in some ways very simple, and in other ways very complex relationship with my own country. I also have to acknowledge that I am probably the least apt of any of this group here to speak on this topic in many ways. And while I'm honored by this opportunity, I come to it with enormous humility. I think I am among the very last of the American diplomats currently in service who actually had the opportunity to see President Rugova in action, and it was an honor. Former Prime Minister Dilemma talked about Rugova as a friend. I don't think I could say that, but I could certainly say that he was an inspiration and a mentor to me. And I reflect that in a couple of different ways. I made the choice, over the advice of my embassy, that on my very first day in Kosovo, immediately after presenting credentials to the President of the Republic, to lay a wreath at his statue. It meant a lot to me personally, but I wanted to signal the United States support for what he stood for and what he did. And I promise you, I'm in no hurry to go, but on my very last day as the personal representative of the President of the United States of America to Kosovo and as the U.S. ambassador here, I will, again, pay respect to President Rugova as one of my very last acts. Because of who he is and what he does, one of the proudest things I have, I will tell you a very quick story. The very first time I met him was here in Pristina. I was traveling with Bob Gelbart, and I was the note taker. And I was a third or second secretary. It's a very junior officer, and did what note takers do. I sat in the room, the principal sat there having the very important conversation. I had my notepad taking notes, and afterwards wrote the official Department of State cable. Adriatic, you can probably file a Freedom of Information Act request and get a copy of that cable now. And I was hoping that he would give me a rock, because this was famous. And many of my colleagues, and he didn't, and I was crushed. I wanted something that was mine, that had been his, and that he'd given to me. I wanted something because I really, really respected what he was doing and how he was doing it, and this commitment of very pragmatic but very principled engagement in one of the most complicated issues we were dealing with. So when I met him next, which was at the Kleber Center in France, at the end of the Rambouillet process, when we all came back for, and again, I was a very junior diplomat there taking notes, I hinted to his interpreter and advisor, Skender Hassani, that I would very much welcome a rock if one was available. And President Rugova came up to me, because he knew who I was at this point. Jeff, I had no idea you wanted this so much. He brought in his suitcase, he had brought only a small collection of rocks too. But he sometimes, as you know, would travel with them. I got one. So, if you go into my office today at the U.S. Embassy, it's a small one. He didn't bring a whole lot in his luggage to the Kleber Center. But if you look at the little table right where I sit when I meet the visitors, there is my little piece of crystal from Kosovo given me by President Rugova. So, I'm just sharing this because I represent a generation of young diplomats who watched our seniors dealing with this issue, who sat in these meetings and learned. We learned from Madeleine Albright, we learned from Bob Gelbart, we learned from Dick Holbrook on our own system, but we also learned from people like Ibrahim Rugova how to take complicated issues, how to marry up passion, how to influence, how to challenge. Again, we heard a little bit, I remember President Clinton's, not apprehension or trepidation, but concerns. And how President Rugova just simply was consistently his principled self and a pragmatic leader, all in one. It was pretty impressive. So, a few things I want to say that I'm going to wrap up because we have a lot more people to hear from and they have so much more to share, honestly. One, I find the motto of this conference both fitting and so appropriate. No one like Ibrahim Rugova could take a folk saying from, oh, it went away now, but a folk saying in Albanian and make it a call for action, this idea of a house cannot be kept without friends. There it is, okay. It reflects him, right? I mean, he knew the importance of friendships and alliances. He knew how to inculcate them. He knew what it meant. I know we're going to talk in a panel, so I'm going to say some things. I want to tell perhaps one last story of what he meant to me personally. I remember in one of these meetings, it's a very complicated meeting, and we got into an issue, again, I was taking notes. I was just sitting there in the back as the second secretary watching a master in action with some other masters from my side in action. But I remember we got to a point in a conversation and we quickly went from a practical conversation to this existential question of what is justice and what is just in this case. And again, these are harder things, by the way, when you're taking your notes as a diplomat to capture in your reporting cable back to very busy people of what to do. And I remember President Rugova quoting Dr. Martin Luther King to an American official about what justice is. That he started quoting from memory from the letter from the Birmingham jail, one of Dr. King's seminal works. And I remember him quoting in particular a phrase saying, I know it's the most well-known phrase from the letter from the Birmingham jail, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I kind of look up and then he started quoting more obscure references in the letter from the Birmingham jail, and the extent to which he started referring to, I don't know how much you know about Dr. King and the time in Birmingham, but the letter itself was written to a bunch of white Christian pastors who were criticizing Dr. King and the Southern Leadership Council for their aggressive approach to demanding, in a peaceful way, civil rights now. And President Rugova started citing our history from the 1960s, started citing what it meant to be one of these white pastors, started citing what it must have felt like to get this letter, started citing, and then he started referring to Dr. King's references to writings of the Apostle Paul. He was an intellectual, but an incredibly informed one. And I made some kind of a noise. I don't remember what I did, because we note takers are supposed to sit quietly in the back, write our notes, produce a cable, and no one knows you're there. And he kind of looked at me. He knew me at this point. He said, you make sure, because Madeline wasn't there, that when you write this up, that Madeline knows I'm quoting Dr. King, and there's a reason why I'm quoting Dr. King. So all I can say is this country is extraordinarily blessed by a leader with vision, by a leader with principle, by a leader with pragmatism, and I'm grateful for the small chance I had to know him and see him in action. Thank you very much.